National Treasury has declined Eskom's exemption from publicly disclosing irregular, fruitless and wasteful expenditure. And that follows an outcry after a gazette from the government was published in April, partially excluding the utility from sections of the Public Finance Management Act. Essentially, critics argued that the move would have worsened fraud and corruption at the struggling utility. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana says the decision was reached following public comments as well as engagements with the Auditor-General. The South African Energy Forum's Executive Director, Hlathi Madela, who joins us now via our video link for his reaction. Lovely to have you on the program, sir. Thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. So just off the bat, how do you see this? I mean, is this National Treasury caving into public pressure, or has sanity and logic prevailed?
I'd say both, but less of the National Treasury caving into the public pressure, because the minister does acknowledge 55 comments that he received from different sectors and individuals. Some of them is individuals that we know. And he does acknowledge that he took those into account, and he lists the ones that were formal and the ones that were sent by email. And even in his communication, he does say that this has not been granted now, following up those consultations. So it's a democratic process that the minister is saying. Well, we started off by saying that in order for Eskom to be able to operate, they need to operate outside the legislated processes of Public Finance Management Act. But the public has warned us, and we are heeding those calls.
Yeah, that's interesting, I suppose. But what do we do now with those arguments that were made initially in support of the decision to essentially grant Eskom this exemption? I remember at the time, we're told, for instance, that investors need to be wooed by making sure that Eskom's balance sheet, at least on the face of it, looks attractive enough. What do we make of those claims? I mean, was that just an explanation for an explanation's sake, or have we lost out on that?
I would not say it was an explanation of an explanation, and I think we will lose out if inside Eskom there's not good enough people to pursue this. They need to pursue this because the words that are used, fruitless expenditure, irregular expenditure, wastage, and all of these things, these words, they are applied to an SOEs. But if you look into what actually constitutes that, it is what the private sector always does all the time. Let me give an example, for instance. A power station manager will have a legislation that if your request for a budget exceeds, for instance, 100 million, you need the approval of all the way to megawatt park. He's sitting at the power station. So if we allow the power station managers and say to them, if you want to procure something and it costs 300 million, and there's all the justifications, you must be empowered to conclude on that and then tap into the money in order to get it. So we as a public, what we need to hope for is that Eskom pursues this, because they actually need to be allowed to tap into what is described as irregular expenditure. I won't go to fruitless because I don't know what fruitless expenditure is, but irregular expenditure means that there's a legislation that was put there that you can only operate within these confines. But the situation at the moment calls for Eskom to operate outside those confines. All of this needs to be taken together and be communicated to the investors to say, we are not doing anything out of the norm. We are doing what the likes of Anglo-Americans are doing, what the likes of Bidvest are doing, what the likes of the international conglomerates who are doing business with us are also doing.
So what are you saying? Part of the outrage was perhaps slightly misplaced?
It's the use of the words fruitless and irregular as if irregular is illegal. Irregular is a term that is professional, that is used. The words that I'm having a problem with is fruitless. That's why I'm giving an example to say, what we need to ask ourselves, what is it that Eskom was wanting to do that the private sector doesn't do? The very same companies who are actually doing business with Eskom and the state, they do 2 times what Eskom is not allowed to do. So can we say that, okay, if you're gonna block Eskom from indulging into irregular expenditure, forget about fruitless. Can we say if you have a contract with the state of South Africa, or you have a contract with Eskom or Transnet, you must also follow the same? I'm telling you, a lot of private businesses would close down, because it would mean if the car breaks down in Ladysmith and somebody is in Johannesburg, they're going to have to wait for the approval of the approval up until that car has been attended to, which should be 5 days down the line. Whereas somebody just needs to go to the bank and say, here's the money, fix that car, come back. Now you can explain that to your manager later and say, listen, I had to take from this month. We don't have a budget of the car breaking down in Ladysmith, but the car broke down in Ladysmith. I needed to take money from petty cash. And this is what they mean by fruitless expenditure.
All right, wasteful, I think, is what you mean. Irregular expenditure is what you're talking about. So then, do you want to revise your answer to my first question? You know, it sounds like to me you actually have a different stance on this, because what I asked when we started our discussion is, has the minister essentially just caved into pressure here, or, you know, is this advisable that he actually backpedal on the granting of the exemption for Eskom? It sounds to me that you reckon we're poorer off now that Eskom is not able to do this.
Hearing your question, I'm trying to say the minister doesn't work for Eskom. He's an administrator, he's a policy maker and a policy overseer. He's bound to consult as much as possible. But if Eskom is not there to defend itself, the minister cannot do the job for Eskom. The people who are missing here is Eskom to pursue this, to say, okay, we hear all those consultations and everything, but how can we fast track them doing everything within the PMFA and within the confines of the legislations in order for these things not to be described as irregular? But knowing Eskom, they're just going to sit there and do nothing, and that's why they are not going to be able to have money for operations and maintenance, because they just never follow up on things. The minister has done his job. It is now in the hands of Eskom. They are the ones who are affected. National Treasury is National Treasury for everything, not just Eskom. So the minister has done his job. It is up to the men and women of Eskom to pursue this, and they need to pursue this.
Okay, fair enough. There must be credence, though, to those concerns around, you know, how potentially that exemption could have created an environment where people would have taken advantage of the leeway that it essentially gives people at Eskom. That analogy you made about a car breaking down in Ladysmith, I can envision a situation where there is no car, there never was a car, but the money was taken nonetheless.
Well, that's the problem, because the people who should be requesting this, they don't have a history of looking after our monies.
Exactly.
And I think that's where the problem is. It's so sad, though, but I would think that maybe Eskom head office, the executive managers of Eskom, they are the ones who should step in and even allow National Treasury to scrutinize this thing, but try to improve the turnaround time. Eskom is in a dire situation. They don't need decisions that take 5 days, 10 days. They need decisions that take a couple of hours. If there's something that requires intervention of National Treasury and all the stakeholders, it needs to be decided today. And that's what they need to do. It's so sad, because they have a long history of not managing the funds properly as Eskom.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hopefully somebody from the utility is listening at least to our discussion and will do something about how things have actually unfolded. But for now, Hlathi Madela, thanks very much indeed for giving us your take. I appreciate your time on the AM Report. Hlathi, of course, is the Executive Director with the South African Energy Forum. Once again, thanks very much indeed.